Senator Bernie Sanders wrote an op-ed where he discusses a 12-step plan for a real economic agenda in America. And he gives you a good sense of what actual progressives stand for. Number one, he says, quote, "We need a $1 trillion investment in infrastructure to create about 13 million decent-paying jobs and make this country more efficient and productive." So let's pause there. His number one proposal, number one on the list, is basically, let's do a new deal. I'm already in. Sold. You got me. Fantastic idea. And our infrastructure right now gets a grade of D from the Civil Society of Engineers, who grade this every few years. And they've said repeatedly, this is insanity. Our bridges are falling apart. Our sewer systems suck. I mean, whatever you want to name in the U.S., it's crumbling. So we need to fix it, and people need jobs. We might as well put two and two together and act on it. So plan number one is that. He continues, number two, quote, "We must transform our energy system away from fossil fuels and into energy efficiency and sustainable energies. We need to greatly accelerate the progress we're already seeing in wind, solar, geothermal, biomass, and other forms of sustainable energy." That's another fantastic idea. You can also file that under the New Deal category, where he says not only rebuild our bridges and our roads and make America number one again in these relevant categories. He also says, let's do the same thing with renewable energy. Let's stop our dependence on foreign fossil fuels, and let's become more independent, and let's do it the right way while we curb climate change. Number three, quote, "Instead of giving huge tax breaks to corporations which ship our jobs to China and other low-wage countries, we need to provide assistance to workers who want to purchase their own businesses by establishing worker-owned cooperatives." Now, I have to admit, and this is why I love Bernie Sanders, Bernie Sanders is more liberal than me. Now, you guys have heard me say this before, and I believe this to my core, that when it comes to U.S. politics, you want to vote for somebody who's to the left of you. Now, why do I say that? Because we know that that person is not going to get all of the policies that they're in favor of. It's not like they become a dictator if they get elected and poof, they get everything they want, in which case there would be some policies in place that are more liberal than you prefer. No, if you vote for the most liberal candidates and they get in power, well, then they can, maybe the compromise position that they get to is the policy that you actually like. So in the U.S., I'm a big fan of voting for people who are more liberal than you are or than I am. And this, I have to admit, on this issue specifically, Bernie Sanders is more liberal than me. I don't think that worker-owned cooperatives are something that we can have across the country in the sense that that's the new normal, where everybody wants to essentially have a democratic workplace. Now, I could be wrong, and maybe history will prove me wrong as time goes by and then more of these pop up and they're wildly successful. That's certainly possible. But I'm more old school in my belief that I think some people actually don't want to be an owner or be a manager, essentially, and have a democracy at the workplace. Some people want to just show up and put in their hours and then go home and go about their business. So he's more liberal than me on this, but you know what? I'm still in favor of it because it shows that his mind is in the right place, where he'll be fighting for the right things. And even if he doesn't get exactly what he wants, maybe the compromise is something which I would be more in favor of. Number four, he says we need new legislation to strengthen unionization. I totally agree with him on that. That's a fantastic idea. Number five, quote, "We need to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. No one in this country who works 40 hours a week should live in poverty." Those are his words. Again, clearly I'm on board with this. Every fair-minded American, I would argue, is on board with that. Number six, we need equal pay for equal work. Number seven, since 2001, he says, quote, "We have lost more than 60,000 factories in this country and more than 4.9 million decent-paying manufacturing jobs. We must end our disastrous trade policies." And he cites NAFTA, CAFTA, GATT, etc. So again, spot on, and nobody else is saying this. Maybe Elizabeth Warren believes in these principles as well, and I would guess that she does, but nobody's really laying this out in as cohesive and coherent a way as Bernie Sanders is. Number 8, he says we need quality, affordable education, including higher education. He doesn't specify that it should be universal and funded by taxpayers. I don't know if he believes that or doesn't believe that. That's the policy I'm in favor of, but at least he's talking about the idea that we need to reduce student loan debt. So his heart's close to in the exact right place on this issue. Number 9, he says, quote, today, 6 huge Wall Street financial institutions have assets equivalent to 61% of our GDP, over $9.8 trillion. Those really are amazing numbers. These institutions underwrite more than half the mortgages in this country and more than 2/3 of the credit cards. The greed, recklessness, and illegal behavior of major Wall Street firms plunged this country into the worst financial crisis since the 1930s. They are too powerful to be reformed. They must be broken up. Boom. Fantastic policy idea. We haven't spoken about that a lot on the show, but it makes perfect sense even under existing legislation. I mean, we have anti-monopoly legislation on the books, and one can argue, any competent lawyer for this field can argue that 6 financial institutions having $9.8 trillion, okay, that's a monopoly problem. We should break up those monopolies and spread it out to bring back actual competition. When you have 6 financial institutions with $9.8 trillion, they can basically rig the market. They run everything. So yes, to break up the big banks and bring back actual competition would be a great thing, and real capitalists and real conservatives should also be with us on that. He says, number 10, we need a Medicare for all system. Number 11, expand Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and nutrition programs. Again, I love this because he's not only saying, hey, keep those programs the same and don't cut them, he's going way over the top with it, and he's saying, no, let's expand those programs, and by the way, the American people, back me on that. And finally, number 12, he says, quote, at a time of massive wealth and income inequality, we need a progressive tax system in this country which is based on ability to pay. It is not acceptable that major profitable corporations have paid nothing in federal income taxes and that corporate CEOs in this country often enjoy an effective tax rate which is lower than their secretaries. That's an inconvenient fact. He continues, it is absurd that we lose over $100 billion a year in revenue because corporations and the wealthy stash their cash in offshore tax havens around the world. The time is long overdue for real tax reform. So, there you have it, Bernie Sanders laying out in great detail his 12-step economic plan for the United States of America. I totally agree with him on these things. The only thing I would add is, well, you should also have put something in there about getting the money out of the political system. Now, I know that Bernie already is in favor of that, but it would have been nice and reassuring to see that he's committed to it in his 12-step plan. So maybe he should have made it a 13-step plan. Because in all seriousness, that's issue number 1. That issue comes before all other issues because the rest of this stuff isn't possible given the current political climate. It becomes possible once you get the root problem of corruption out of the system in the United States, but until you do that, none of these things can happen. And I do mean none of these things. Until we get that, we have nothing but tweaks around the edges in terms of policy. Very right-wing, at best centrist reforms where they throw a bone to the population every once in a while, but really no systemic change. And that's the main point, is that today in the U.S., the rich get exactly what they want in terms of their policy ideas. Polling research has shown this. There was a recent political science study that came out which detailed this, where they showed that for the majority of the American people, in fact, for the American people, unless you're in the elite, the donor class, you don't get what you want, ever. So over 90% of us want a background check for gun purchases, universal. Didn't get it. Filibustered by the Republicans. 80% of us want a minimum wage increase. Didn't get it. Only 17% of us still want to be in Afghanistan. We're staying in Afghanistan. So how could it be that we consistently lose on every single issue when we have a democracy and public opinion should dictate the policy? Because they're not listening to us. And they're not listening to us because we are not paying them. It's the donor class, the corporations, Wall Street, the rich, the establishment. They are paying the politicians, and then the politicians do the bidding of the people who gave them the money. Because over 95% of the time, the politician that raises the most money ends up winning. So they have people that they're beholden to. It's, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. You gave me money to get in office. Okay, ExxonMobil, what can I do for you? Okay, Walmart, what can I do for you? Okay, random investment bank on Wall Street, what can I do for you? So that's the problem. All these things are fantastic, but they won't go anywhere until we get step one done first, which is getting the corruption out of the political system in the U.S.